We're going to do a presentation underneath this maple tree with the Canadian flag on it. So it's good to have you folks at our sugarbush today on this gorgeous March day with a cloudless sky. My name is Fred Elliott, and what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the sugar maple tree. We're going to talk about how you make high-grade fancy maple syrup, and we're going to talk about how it was discovered. But I'm going to start off with a little story about us. My first experience making maple syrup was 1948, helping on the family farm down near Peterborough, Ontario. And of course, at that age, I was more of a nuisance than a help. But when I grew up, as soon as you could carry something, you had to work. So when I moved to this farm in 1984, which will be 40 years on June the 4th of this year, we weren't here long before we started making maple syrup. And what the story is about is that we made the maple syrup for ourselves, family, and friends. And then in 2020, we were in COVID lockdown. And Derek, my son, and I, who now runs the farm, I'm just here to help him, we got our heads together and thought, you know what, people have no place to go. Everything's in a lockdown. You can't go to a hotel, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't go to a hockey game. But you could have 50 people outdoors, so we had picnic tables spread across here about 10 feet apart. We were cooking the pancakes in the woodshed over here. And the first weekend we were open, we had about 25 people, and they were literally eating their pancakes while it was snowing. The second weekend, we had about 30 people, and the third weekend, we were sold out. And on Friday night, Ontario went into another lockdown. So everybody got their money. We had all these packages of sausage and bacon, but we thought we were onto something because everybody that was here enjoyed us. So the second year we converted the museum into the dining facility, so at least you weren't out in the elements. And then the third year we got rid of our horses. They went to another good home. Don't misunderstand. When I say we got rid of them, they were adopted. And we converted the horse barn into a canteen. As a matter of fact, one day I was back in the canteen and I heard somebody say, you know what, this really was a horse barn. So now you can enjoy your pancake breakfast in a warm, heated environment. And back here in the sugar bush, we're making maple syrup the way it was made 200 years ago, with two exceptions. We don't collect our sap in wooden buckets anymore because we know they do hold bacteria. This is food-grade plastic. And we don't cook our syrup in cast iron pots anymore because we know it does emit lead poisoning. So we're cooking in food-grade stainless steel, collecting in food-grade plastic. Now let's talk about the sugar maple tree. The sugar maple tree, like any tree, inhales carbon dioxide and exhales oxygen. All trees do that. But the sugar maple tree does something just a little bit different. What it does, in the process, it converts carbon dioxide into starch. When the leaves come out on the tree, which will be somewhere in the third week in May, the sun shining on the leaf will create a process called photosynthesis that converts the starch into grape sugar. The grape sugar spends its summertime in the tree while the tree is growing and the leaves are out. When the leaves start to fall in the fall, that grape sugar comes down the sapwood of the tree into the root system of the tree, which is deep in the ground, and it spends the entire winter there. As soon as we get a little bit of warm weather in the spring or late winter, that grape sugar comes up the sapwood of the tree in the form of maple sugar, and that's what we make our maple syrup out of. And you can make maple syrup out of the silver maple, the red maple, the black maple, but nothing will taste like the syrup you've had that comes out of the sugar maple tree. Sugar maple trees are native only to northeastern North America, which means that Canada has 90% of the world's maple sugar trees, which in turn means that we here in Canada make 90% of the world's maple syrup. And the two biggest producers are Quebec and Ontario. Quebec produces much more syrup than Ontario, but here in Ontario, we feel we make the best maple syrup in Ontario. A couple of food for thoughts on the sugar maple tree that I love to share with everybody. The first food for thought is this. European settlers arrived here in the early 1600s. We all know that a lot of those settlers did not make it through the first winter. And we also are aware that some of them didn't make it through the second winter. But think about this for a second. When these Europeans arrived here, they came across a nation of people living in teepees made out of animal hides, having healthy babies, living healthy, active lives, and from some of the photographs I've seen, living to a pretty ripe old age. We believe that they knew how to make maple sugar. They didn't make maple syrup, they made maple sugar for 1,000 to 1,200 years before the first settlers arrived. Maple syrup has 42 minerals and vitamins and 10 antioxidants. Is it just possible that these natives, their diet was what they could hunt, kill, cook, and eat? Is it just possible they got their nutrition from their maple sugar? They had no access to fruit, berries, vegetables in the wintertime. Food for thought. Second food for thought about the sugar maple tree. Of all the plant food we eat, this is the only plant food we eat that has roots deep in the ground, that brings up trace minerals that no other plant food we eat can reach. Did everyone here try the raw sap? That raw sap, ladies and gentlemen and children, has invisible suspended sand in it. If that sand were in water, that sand is so fine, if it were in water, it would become silt. Because of the sugar content in the sap, it has a higher density and it's able to float that sugar or that sand. And that sand is what brings up the minerals and vitamins. And we know there's sand in it because as we cook the water off, the sand congeals and comes big enough that you can actually see it with the naked eye. And at the end of the season, when we finish our last batch, there will be an inch and a half of sand in the bottom of the evaporator pan, and that's what brings up the minerals and vitamins. My favorite one about the sugar maple tree, and this is only my opinion, there's a lot of push on eating organic food. Probably not a bad idea, because I have read and seen or heard that some of the chemicals and some of the preservatives in our food might even cause illnesses. Well, let's talk about organic food for a minute. If it's rained on your patch of soil, you have contaminated soil. Most of the pollutants come from the sky in the form of rain. But let's talk about the sugar maple tree. It's going to rain here according to my weather app on Wednesday. But before that rain gets to the root system in this tree, which is where we get our sap from, it has to go through a layer of topsoil, a layer of gravel, and probably a layer of clay. I would say it's pretty well filtered out by the time it gets there. So what's my point? This might be the only organic food left on the planet. Anybody have any questions?
Why does it taste so good?
Why does it taste so good? I mean, I've read all about this stuff, right? When the first Europeans got here, they were used to cane sugar, and they couldn't believe the taste of this maple syrup. I have some every day. 42 minerals and vitamins, 10 antioxidants. Usually food that is good for you doesn't taste good. This one is the exception. Okay, let's talk about making high-grade, high-quality maple syrup. So I've already mentioned that we're making syrup here the way it was made 200 years ago. And if you wanted to buy syrup in the 1950s or the 1960s, it was not available in the store. Back in that period, if you wanted to buy maple syrup, you had to go to a farmer who was making maple syrup. It's become a commercialized product. We're keeping it a small batch product the way it was made 200 years ago. And to make high-end maple syrup, you have to cook it to 7.5 degrees above the boiling point of water. We're going to get to more on that in a minute. However, I have a question. Who here has bought maple syrup in the store and over time you've seen a crust of sugar in the bottom of the container? Put up your hand. Put it up high so we can see it. We can't see this. We can't see this. Reach for the sky. So there's 3 people here who have seen sugar in their container. That syrup was overcooked. Who here has bought syrup in the store and over time there's been a little crust of mold on top of the syrup? Has anyone ever seen that? Put your hand up nice and high. Yeah, that lady has seen that. So that syrup was undercooked. Cooking temperatures and precise cooking temperatures is very critical in having maple syrup that has a shelf life of 100 years. And I tell everybody, if you buy some of our syrup and you take it home, and in 100 years it's gone bad, you bring it on back. Now, I might not be here to help you out, but someone will. So let's talk about the temperatures. We cook only in thermometers only in Fahrenheit. What's the boiling point of water Fahrenheit? Anybody? Who said that? This fella here said 212. Let's let him know he knows what he's talking about. However, that's at sea level. That's standard atmospheric pressure. We're not at sea level. We rarely get standard atmospheric pressure here, and I'm not going to tell you how we did this years ago. And yeah, we're spending our time back here working with nature all the time, but we do work with technology when we can, and I have a little device here that tells me what the boiling point of water is at this precise moment in time, and it is...
No glasses on, so I have no idea.
It's 209.
209, 209.8. That's a long ways off of 212. So if we went 7.5 degrees above 212, we'd have sugar in our container in no time. So here's what makes maple syrup that has a shelf life of 100 years. 209.8 is 217.3 degrees, and immediately it comes off the heat, filtered, bottled, cap on the bottle tight, and here's the next thing that only small producers can do: lay the bottle on its side. Why would you do that? Well, the inside of the neck of the bottle has been exposed to the atmosphere. It's contaminated. The cap's been exposed to the atmosphere. It's contaminated. When you lay the bottle on its side, you've got that 200 plus degree syrup sterilizing the neck, sterilizing the inside of the cap. And when you lay the bottle on its side, that air bubble that would be at the cap it was standing up is not exposed to the cap. So as that syrup cools and shrinks and contracts, it creates a perfect vacuum on the seal of the cap. Any questions? Yes?
How often, how fast does that number change? Like, would it change from now to tonight or from now to tomorrow? Or?
Oh, it was different this morning. The first group we had here this morning, it'll change 2 or 3 times during the day.
So you would like consistently pretty much every like hour check it?
No, I only check it when I'm going to be bottling.
Okay.
So I'm bringing my syrup up to temperature. Let's say it's this afternoon at 3 o'clock. So as I'm getting close to temperature, I'll pull this little device out. And I'm not going to tell you how we did it years ago, because it didn't matter, because no one was interested in shelf life. It wasn't sent to big box stores to be sitting on the shelf for 2 years. People bought it and ate it. Any other questions? Okay, let's talk about how it was discovered. Now, this is a tricky one, and I'll tell you why it's tricky. Because the natives that lived here when the Europeans arrived, they kept no documented records. Everything was legend passed on from generation to generation. We've probably all been to a party where I tell you something, and you tell her what I said, and you tell her what I said, and you tell him, and he tells him, and he tells her. And then she says what she was told, and it's not similar to what I started off with. So I all been to that party game, right? So we're dealing with legends for 1,000 years, but that's all we have to go with. To set up for the legend of discoveries, there's a couple things I have to explain. We collect our sap 1 drop at a time. And it's not running yet because it's too cold. But when this sap is coming out of these spigots at excess of 60 drops per minute, that's what we call in the industry a run. We get about 12 of those a year. I have not seen this, but I have read where the drops have been recorded at 300 drops per minute. Second thing we have to explain is the raw sap that you tasted has a sugar content of about 3%. Can be as high as 5%. We know that by using a refractor to test the sugar content. And the third part of the discovery on the legend is, if you look up into this tree, you'll see broken branches. You'll see some little ones, you'll see some big ones. And those branches are broken by ice storms, snowstorms, and windstorms. That's nature's way of pruning the tree. So if we had a run going here today, off these broken branches there would be sap dropping on everybody under the tree. Not like rainfall, but there would be drops of sap coming down. You've probably all experienced that in your driveway or in someone's backyard who had a sugar maple tree. Two legends on how it was discovered. One of them must be, but both of them can't be right. Legend number one, a hunter walking through the bush on a hunting trip on a day just like today, not a cloud in the sky. And all of a sudden, a big splat of water hits him on the back of the hand. What do you think he did? Yeah, exactly. According to legend, he went like that. He knew it wasn't water. He knew it didn't come from the sky. He saw it was coming from the broken branch on this tree. Legend doesn't tell us how it got from that discovery to making maple sugar. I will explain the maple sugar in a minute, but that's legend number one on how it was discovered that this tree had something special to it. Legend number two, another hunter. And by the way, I remind everybody in the 1600s in Canada, when you went hunting, you could become the hunted. And maybe some of these settlers didn't make it because they didn't want to go to their cabin in the wintertime. Anyhow, hunter, coming back from a hunting trip, got one of those big hatchets in his hand. You've probably seen them in museum, a stone hatchet, pretty blunt end on it. As he gets to his village, he walks up to a tree and he just drives the hatchet into the tree and splits the bark wide open. We got a good run going. We got high sugar content. And just then, one of the ladies in the village asked her daughter to take the birch bark container and go to the stream over there and get some water for dinner. Well, like any child, she came out of the teepee and thought, why would I walk all the way over there when there's water running off the end of this piece of bark right here? So legend has it that she took her birch bark container, held it underneath the flow until she had sufficient. Can you imagine how dinner tasted that night? Cooked in sap rather than water. Legend doesn't tell us whether they're eating muskrat, moose, or beaver, or what they're eating, but that's legend number two on the discovery. Now, I mentioned they didn't make maple syrup because they had nothing to keep it in. They had no containers to store it in. They turned all of their sap into maple sugar, and here's how they did it. And you'll see these in the museum. In the museum, you'll see the birch bark containers they use, and you'll see the trough that they cook their maple sugar in. So what they do is they'd find an old log, they'd take their stone implements, they'd hollow it out until they had a trough, collect the sap in the birch bark container, put the sap in the trough they'd made, get a fire going over here, a good-sized fire, stones about so big in the fire. When those stones got crackling hot, they take their sticks, pick up the rock, set it in the trough, and they take that sap right through to maple sugar, which they could store in their birch bark containers. And there's even recorded history that they traded it with other tribes who didn't have access to maple sugar. And they weren't long discovering if they wanted syrup, all they had to do was add water to the sugar. Anybody have any questions?
Do you have other trees that could be made into syrup, like birch trees? Or...
You can make syrup out of a birch tree. You can, and I have not made it, but I've tasted it, and it's way down the list to me on taste. And another cool thing about here at our farm, if anyone's interested in purchasing some of our syrup, you can sample the gold and the amber and the dark before you make your purchase and see which one you prefer. And there's another product we have here that I just have to talk about, and it's maple floss. Everybody's here has had floss at the county fair or the township fair. Well, you know, you're eating dye and cane sugar and probably corn syrup. This floss is made out of maple sugar, and it is amazing. If you thought the toffee was great, you got to try the floss. Any questions? Okay, so we have a couple of things here that I want to mention. Children, what I've just talked about, we can talk about this tree for an hour and a half or 2 hours. We can talk about making high quality maple syrup for a couple of hours as well. I'm not going to bore you with that. But this is a drop of sap on the front of this book, and this book is called Sappy. This is a coloring book, has some mazes in it, covers everything I've talked about plus more. Great show and tell, great gift. And for the first time ever at Elliott Tree Farm, we're making a maple cookie called Sappy. And this maple cookie's been through the last few weekends. Someone must have sat on it, but this is Sappy on the front of the guy. Tell all the parents, if you're going to buy one of these for your children, give it to them well before bedtime. And for anyone who likes good graphics and extra information, this is called the Maple Syrup Alphabet. Great graphics, great information about the product of maple syrup. It's got maple syrup on it. And my favorite to talk about, and this is for the big kids, Sweet Ontario. Cooking and baking with maple syrup. And here's what I love about this book. I'm just going to open it at a page. Doesn't matter which one I open it at. Does that look any good? So in closing, I would like to say, enjoy sharing our time with you here at the farm today. I wish you all a safe trip home. I wish you a great summer. And if you're interested in Christmas tree season and coming out to our farm for a Christmas tree, you can get one that we've cut, or you can take the family and the dog out and you can cut one your own, and lots of people love doing that. So have a great trip home. Good having you here. God bless all of you. Thank you.